Morning, everyone. Today is Yom HaZikaron, which is Israel's Memorial Day, followed by Yom HaAtzmaut, part of the series of Yoms that are commemorated this time of year. Also, as I just learned, Yom Herzl on the 10th of Iyar, and then Yom Yerushalayim. It's a period between Pesach and Shavuos, which has a lot of memory and a lot of legacy and a lot of meaning and memory, which makes sense considering that we say every Friday night that it's Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim. The Exodus started it all, and this is a period of time between Pesach and Shavuos, which certainly formed who we are as a people. So it's not unusual that historically it became a period of great reflection and meaning. The Omer period, that the Rabbi Akiva students, Lag BaOmer, it all makes sense that this be a period of development. And I wanted to talk about who celebrates Yom HaAtzmaut and who doesn't. We're not going to go around the Zoom and to raise a show of hands. But the idea of Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, it's a reality. Israel as a state was declared on the 5th of Iyar in 1948, and Israel exists. And some of the commemoration and celebration, could be fraught with, we try to keep politics out of some of these ceremonies, especially on Memorial Day. But we live in the real world, and the real world is messy. People have different reactions and responses. I would say that if one looks back at the recorded reflections of Israel's Independence Day, May 14th, 1948, Hey Iyar, that year, there was a lot of enthusiasm and excitement at that moment. You didn't really have as many protesters against the idea of Zionism taking place on that day itself, because it was a momentous day that symbolized a lot for every single person living certainly in Israel at that time and beyond, especially the proximity to the Holocaust. There were ideological disputes, of course. At the same time, the practical reaction of having this moment was exciting. Although, as I pointed out in my Shabbat shir, Ben Gurion wasn't that excited. He was actually a little bit dejected, and he was very nervous. Both after the partition vote in 1947, November 29th, and then on May 14th, he wrote in his diary, once again, everyone is rejoicing and I am not, because he knew that these steps forward would be accompanied by setbacks and attacks and the like. So we're going to take a look at some reactions to how to celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut, some of the issues that are involved, some of the reactions, and some of the different views of different camps. I think we all kind of can understand. You kind of have the Zionist camp who are more lean into Yom HaAtzmaut, and you have those who are non-Zionists who stay away from it. As we'll see, there's kind of a crossing of the lines. Some Zionists are less excited about the ritualization of Yom HaAtzmaut. And some non-Zionists are very excited by what spiritually a state of Israel represents. So we're gonna start by launching into the headlines. And these are reactions that were taking place in Israel yesterday as Yom HaZikaron began on Monday evening. So, if we would go to the headlines today, you'd probably see, or you go to headlines tomorrow, you'll see about Yom HaAtzmaut reactions. But, for example, source number one, police arrest ultra-Orthodox extremists seen tearing down Israeli flags on the eve of Memorial Day. All right, so as Israelis are starting to mourn Yom HaZikaron, police say they've arrested two ultra-Orthodox extremists who were allegedly seen tearing down Israeli flags in the town of Beit Shemesh on the eve of Memorial Day. Suspects were transferred for questioning, after which a decision will be made as to whether to request that their remand be extended. Okay, they disagreed with the day. Again, it's vandalism. There's an offense, but we see this is this is an ideological dispute. The idea people talk about, what happens on July 4th if people burn the flag. You can burn your flag, can't burn someone else's flag. They tore it down. But again, we see this as emotions running high in terms of ideologies. So next headline. joint Israeli-Palestinian Memorial Day ceremony held amid far-right threats against participants. Kind of an extension of those who want to commemorate Yom HaZikaron. The 21st alternative Israeli-Palestinian Memorial Day ceremony in Jaffa begins, conducted in both Hebrew and Arabic and featuring both Israelis and Palestinians who lost loved ones in the October 7, 2023 Hamas-led massacre in Israel, the war in Gaza, and the ongoing settler violence in the West Bank. The ceremony has been held annually for 2 decades alongside Israel's official memorial ceremonies and the Memorial Day for fallen soldiers and victims of terror. It's organized by the left-wing group Combatants for Peace and by the Parents Circle Families Forum, a grassroots organization of bereaved Israelis and Palestinians who've lost members to the conflict. Palestinians participate in a parallel ceremony in the West Bank of Jericho, unable to reach Jaffa due to the denial of entry permits by Israeli authorities. The exact location was not publicly disclosed in advance due to security concerns, particularly after a right-wing mob attack last year in a synagogue in Ra'anana that was hosting a screening of the event. The mob threw rocks, shouted racist slogans, spat at participants, and forced police to evacuate the venue. So here you have an extended demographic commemorating Yom HaZikaron, Israelis and Palestinians, but the location is secret because some Israelis are against this. And last year there was an incident in Ra'anana. Third headline, Ultra-Orthodox Brigade holds Memorial Day ceremony after reports it would do so. And more further extension of the demographics commemorating Yom HaZikaron. The IDF's Hasmonean Brigade for Ultra-Orthodox troops held a Memorial Day ceremony this evening at the unit's training base in the Jordan Valley, despite a report claiming that the Haredi soldiers would not participate in such an event. The ceremony included reading a Yizkor memorial prayer, lighting a flame, lowering the state flag to half-mast, and singing the Hatikva national anthem according to the military. Channel 13 reported earlier that the ultra-Orthodox unit's troops would not participate in Memorial Day or Independence Day in an effort to present their exposure to Zionist content, which could be unsuitable for a Haredi audience. In a post on X, Chairman Aryeh Deri says that he is lighting a candle and offering a prayer for the ascent of the souls, the idea of soldiers and security forces personnel who bravely gave their lives to defend the nation and the land, and for the ascent of the souls of the victims of terror who were murdered in sanctification of God's name. Yeah, I think this news blurb has a lot of the issues that we're dealing with in terms of, is this spiritual, is this political, is this both? And with regard, especially with regard to the Hashmonai Brigade, it touches upon the whole, whether everyone should serve and Haredim should serve, can serve, are their needs met? And you see that there was a pushback, or there were those who thought that the Haredi Brigade, they are serving is important, but not necessarily the trappings of the state in terms of Memorial Day with the official pomp and circumstance, singing of Hatikva and the like, as well as the article also mentioning how Aryeh Deri, head of Shas, Haredi Sephardi Party, who is commemorating it, and you notice that his commemoration is very spiritual in nature. A Yurtzai candle, ascent of the souls. They gave their lives defending the nation and the land. No mention of the state, which is prominent in Israel's official commemoration, and then, of course, those who died on Kiddush Hashem. So there's certainly different lanes that people can be in as it pertains to the Yom HaZikaron, these headlines. But I think the same are the issues that surrounding the idea of Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day, and we're going to look at a couple of the religious, or sometimes it of course turns into halachic issues that surround the celebration of Yom HaAtzmaut right now, and then we'll look at some of the practical reactions, because I often when people talk about the kashrus and the different hashgachos and supervisions, I always like to say that kashrus is the unholy trinity of money, politics, and religion. And that factors into, is this reliable, not reliable, who accepts, who doesn't accept it, et cetera, et cetera. I think that, the celebration of Yom HaAtzmaut has halachic issues, and also has spiritual issues, and also has political issues, and power issues, communal dynamics at play. So let's start with the religious issues, and the idea of having a holiday, right? What kind of holidays can we accept? And for the most part, we know the holidays because we buy a Jewish calendar at the beginning of the year. It has all the special days in it. So depending on which calendar you buy, will there be Yom HaAtzmaut or Yom Yerushalayim? I don't think any of us have a calendar that has Yom Herzl in it. I hadn't heard about it until yesterday. So, But what about how do some of the holidays? They weren't all declared at the same time. You have, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, but then you have Hanukkah and Purim, right? And then Lag BaOmer is a whole separate category. So how do holidays develop? So the Ramban mentions, with regards to the Torah's prohibition of lo sosifu, you cannot add what's called bal tosif. You're not allowed to add commandments. Bal tigra, you're not allowed to take away commandments. We have commandments. We have to follow them. We're not supposed to add or subtract. So source number 4, in my opinion, even creating a new mitzvah by itself, such as the holiday which Yerava made, which violates this prohibition. You can't have any other holidays. Similarly, they said regarding the reading of the Megillah, there are 180 prophets who prophesied for Israel. They did not subtract or add to what is written in the Torah except even one letter, except for the reading of the Megillah. So the Ramban mentions a holiday that was set up in Malachim Aleph with regards to allowing people to go to the Beis HaMikdash. He says that's not a good idea because it's a new holiday. And he even quotes the Talmud saying that the Nevi'im prophets don't introduce new rules, noting that Megillah is an exception, right? Purim is really an exception. Purim really doesn't fit the mold. We're not supposed to have new holidays. Purim was added. It was added. It was kind of post. It's not post-biblical because they added Megillat Esther into the Bible, but the Ramban seems to cast a little bit of a asterisk, a little bit of an aspersion as the Purim. Maybe if it was up to the Ramban, there would be no Purim because it was added. Suffice it to say, if Purim is difficult, what about Hanukkah, right? And in fact, when the Gemara talks about Hanukkah's establishment in Gemara Shabbos, it says that Lishana Acheres. Right, the battle took place. The Maccabees won. They went into the Beis HaMikdash. They couldn't find oil. They found enough oil, and it lasted enough time, and they celebrated. And then it says Lishana Acheres. They established the holiday of Hanukkah. Lashana Acheres is sometimes translated as, well, starting next year. Now we have a holiday of Hanukkah. Others feel Lashana Acheres means at some later point. It wasn't so easy to establish Hanukkah because who are we to add holidays? So what is with regard to Purim, some of the rationale or the motivation or the inspiration for Purim seems that it was the fact that the Jewish community, led by Mordechai and Esther, took control in an effort to save the people, to redeem the people. The Sfas Emes, the Ger Rebbe, first Ger Rebbe writing in about Purim. And so this timeline, 5643 was 1883. Yeah. So he talks about Purim, source 5, the holiday of Purim, Haya hachana levinyan ba'asheni. Purim was setting the stage for the building of the second temple. It's about grassroots, ground up motivation. This was the time that the rabbis took the reins of the community. As the period of the prophets ends, the people, led by the rabbis, took charge. And the Jews came together. Right, this is the idea of the eternal Torah. God gave us eternal life. Eternal life is the ability of the Torah to continue to all times. And this was their opposition to Haman and Amalek. And it was, we know about the battle against Amalek in the Torah, and it says we're supposed to remember and not to forget. And here the Jewish people acted upon that. They had a situation of Amalek's descendant, Haman, and they took action. And he calls this kind of the grassroots, bottom-up motivation. Rabbi Yaakov Lorberbaum, writing about Purim also, takes this further. They saw that this was an opportunity to take charge. The Chashvushu Aschalta de Geula. The Aschalta de Geula, Tchilat HaGeula, the beginning of the redemption. And they decided to begin that process. And therefore, we should celebrate the beginning of that redemption, just like we celebrated the redemption in Pesach. Pesach also was the beginning. Pesach leads to Sinai, which leads to the Jewish people. So here, this grassroots, ground up, bottom up activity, which led to a victory, is deserving of celebration. Aschalta de Geula. And there are, many who look at Yom Ha'atzmaut carrying forward that idea. There were enemies of the Jews, and the people took action. They had the opportunity, and this is Aschalta de Geula. This is the beginning. This is something that gets worked into the official prayer for the state of Israel, composed by the chief rabbinate. Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu. It's the beginning. How far we're into the beginning? Is it the beginning of the beginning? Is it the middle of the beginning? We can have all sorts of reactions, but on some level, Yom Ha'atzmaut can be modeled from a religious perspective, can be modeled after Purim. And we know that throughout Jewish history, communities, when they had reasons to celebrate, or even families when they had reasons to celebrate, celebrated their own kind of Purim. The Magen Avraham mentions that Yecholim b'nei ha'ir, source 7, l'takein b'haskama u'b'charim aleihem v'al habayim achareihem lasos Purim b'yom shana sebones. Communities can set up their own Purim. If there's a community that's saved, and we have the Purim of the Jews of Libya, and the Purim of Jews of Egypt, and there's the Purim-like celebration that the Rabbi Avram Danzig, the Chaye Adam, set up for his family when he was saved from a fire in his home. The idea that there is this ability to set up a holiday in the spirit of Purim. Purim is actually a prototype for the types of genuine religious celebrations, holidays that can be established going forward. And in particular, people look at the holiday of Purim. We're going to talk a little bit about Hallel next. But so if on some level the narrative for establishing Yom Ha'atzmaut based on religious foundations is we have a Purim. We have a Purim that was accepted as a Purim. We have a Purim that modeled the ability to set up a Yom Tov that's a binding Yom Tov by those who engage in it subsequently. Yom Ha'atzmaut is something similar. The pushback is, well, we don't feel it the same way. The pushback is that on the 5th of Iyar, it was a declaration of a state, and you don't have the exact same situation that's not analogous, but there certainly is a stream in religious understanding of how the Jews operate and celebrate. Yom Ha'atzmaut is not unique in the idea of there being a celebration like this. So that's on one level. Can we set up holidays? We can. You don't want to, that's a separate discussion. But again, who celebrates Yom Ha'atzmaut? Well, if you celebrate Purim, you can celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut. If you celebrate Purim, you don't have to celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut. It doesn't have the same binding nature. It's not part of the Talmud. It doesn't have the same grounding and binding nature, but you can set up a holiday. What about saying Hallel? So Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut is something that was instituted. We'll talk a little bit about how it's instituted, is with a bracha, without a bracha. There are different practices. But what about Hallel itself? Can we say Hallel? So the Gemara Psachim introduces when to say Hallel. Who recites Hallel? Well, the prophets set up that Israel should recite Hallel every time that there's a misfortune, that we hope it doesn't happen, but if there is a misfortune and then we're redeemed, we say Hallel in gratitude for redemption. So when the Jews are redeemed, there should be Hallel. The Meiri there comments that any individual who is in distress and was saved from it is permitted to fix the recitation of Hallel for himself on that day each year. However, he should not recite a blessing over it. And so too is the law for any group. There's an audience of prophets who say it for any distress from which we have been saved. So there you have the idea of Hallel can be said and can become something that is can be set up. The Meiri doesn't want there to be a bracha, because when we say a bracha, what do we say? Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. God commands us. And, God only commanded saying Hallel a certain number of times, according to the Meiri. But the idea of saying Hallel for salvation is grounded, and it could be something that becomes a religious fixture annually, according to the Meiri. Then we also have the idea that the Yom Ha'atzmaut takes place during the Omer. And during the Omer, we have a period of certain practices of mourning. There were mourning, where we don't have weddings or celebrations. There is no haircuts. Some don't shave, and that's in and of itself is an interesting spectrum of how the practices are applied and what the customs are and when the customs are. But Rabbi Chaim Pelagi, 19th century Turkish rabbi, talks about that there were those who had a Purim, remember we said that there were those who were having Purims in source number 7 that became binding on communities. Nagu be'irenu Izmir, that they had families that had a Purim on Yom Ches l'Chodesh Iyar. On 8 Iyar, they had a Purim. So we have Yom Ha'atzmaut on Hey Iyar, we have Yom Herzl on 10 Iyar, now we have some sort of Izmir Purim on 8 Iyar. This was, of course, before there was Yom Ha'atzmaut or Yom Herzl. So why? Geshenasa lahem nes v'kavos so Yom Purim l'doros. They set up a Purim on the 8th of Iyar during the Omer. And there was also those who came from Angora that also had a Purim on the day of 11 Iyar. Okay, another community had a Purim on 11 Iyar. They're not saying Tafnun, they're getting haircuts. He said it's not right for those who are keeping the Omer to be the ones to give haircuts to those who do get haircuts. So the Reb Chaim Pelagi is pointing out that this was a period that the Jewish barbers did not do very well because it's the Omer period. And he's saying that if you have someone who's going to get a haircut on this time, it's not right for him to, it's not right for those who are not getting haircuts to be the ones to give the haircuts at this time. But if that's your custom, then that's your custom. So this idea that you can't have a Yom Tov during the Omer, there's also pushback on. Again, and when it comes to Yom Ha'atzmaut, there's some on Yom Ha'atzmaut who are ignore it completely, and there's some who recognize it but don't say Hallel, and there's some who do say Hallel but don't get haircuts. Right? There's a spectrum, but we do see that to say that there's absolutely no legitimacy for creating new holidays and for saying Hallel and for celebrating during the Omer, there are certainly views that came before us that were setting new holidays, saying Hallel, and even setting new holidays during the period of the Omer. So those are kind of the three basic halachic issues around Yom Ha'atzmaut. We're going to jump into the reaction to actual 1948 itself in a moment. We'll just stop for any questions or comments. Keeping in mind that we're going to get into 1948 and its aftermath in just a moment.
Can you repeat that remark about unholy something that you said in the beginning?
The what?
About
the unholy trinity of kashrut?
Kashrut, something about kashrut.
Yeah, kashrut combines money, politics, and religion.
Okay.
They don't always go well together.
Republic Center.
All right, so let's jump into 1948. What happened in 1948? How was the immediate reaction to 1948? So Rabbi Menachem Kasher has an article, has a book he wrote called Kol HaTor, which was in reaction to the Six-Day War, but he collects a lot of the documents and a lot of the reactions among the Jews living in Israel to 48 and 67. And suffice it to say, if you're living in Israel in 1948 and you're living in Israel in 1967, it's pretty hard not to feel excitement, because this is a big deal. It's a big deal for the Jewish people. It's a big deal in Jewish history. There's what to celebrate. At the same time, as things became more institutionalized or ritualized, then you had some difference of opinion. So, for example, the chief rabbinate came out in 1949 in advance of the first anniversary of the State of Israel with its psak, with its religious decision, that saying that the reaction, the fundamental response to God's mercy, lahatzalasenu l'fnus nafshenu im hachrazat atzma'utenu ba'aretz, mechayev otanu l'kayem l'kabel aleinu l'dorot yom hachrazat b'dinat Yisrael hu yom hei b'iyar shebachol shana v'shana. What's our reaction? What's our religious responsibility? We have an obligation to accept upon ourselves the 5th of Iyar, l'yom simcha shel atchalta d'geula l'klal Yisrael. We accepted that it's the beginning of the redemption for the Jewish people. We can remove it this day from the sadness of the Omer. We should say the appropriate praises of thanksgiving and have, most importantly, rabbis have to give sermons on it in shul, and there has to be an acknowledgement and a celebration. So that was the chief rabbinate reaction. That was their psak. You can remove yourself from the Omer. It has to be celebrated. Within, since it's coming from the chief rabbinate, we already know that there were those who were opposed to the very idea of a chief rabbinate. I think we've spoken about that before in terms of the authority of the chief rabbinate. In general, authority, can sometimes be limited based upon the boundaries and who gives the authority. Right. My favorite comment on this. New York set up a chief rabbi, Rabbi Jacob Joseph, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef. That's the RJJ school is named after him in the end of the 19th century. They felt that the community needed a chief rabbi, and they brought him in. It did not work very well. It was a failed experiment. Actually, part of it fell apart over kashrus, but it led to there being other rabbis who had, this community was more the Lithuanian synagogue set up for the chief rabbi. So the Polish synagogues, the Hungarian synagogues, they had their own chief rabbi. And then one rabbi had the title Chief Rabbi of America. And they asked him where he got the title. He said, the sign painter. Right? He made the sign, so that's what made him Chief Rabbi of America. So the Chief Rabbinate of Israel has faced similar back and forth. The difference there being that in Israel, the Chief Rabbinate gets its authority from the state. The state has political authority, the state has legal authority and the like. But once the chief rabbinate said there is Yom Ha'atzmaut, then there was pushback that said it's not who's the chief rabbi to say Yom Ha'atzmaut, and you encounter that complication. You also have the rituals that the chief rabbinate instituted. Hallel with a bracha wasn't one of them. They held back based on what we saw in the Meirian source number 9 from saying Hallel with the bracha, although much of the religious Zionist community does say Hallel with the bracha. Feeling that, the Gemara says when you are saved and when you have reason to praise and you have to say Hallel. And that's something that became, I wouldn't say a point of contention, but a point of different practice. And then there are those who say, since the chief rabbinate says to say Hallel without a bracha, others say that you can't say it at all. Then this idea of saying that you can suspend the sadness of the Omer also face pushback from those who oppose the chief rabbinate. So you end up with the rabbis or rabbinic leaders from the different camps who stepped in to issue their either agreement or disagreement. In America, separated from the chief rabbinate, you had the Mizrahi rabbis who decided they wanted to celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut. They encouraged a celebration based upon the psak of the chief rabbinate that we saw. So the Agudas HaRabbanim, the non-Mizrahi rabbi, said, "How can you declare this? You didn't ask our permission first." And there was a back and forth as to which rabbis get to declare. Again, sort of like who gave you the authority. In any event, one of the rabbis who had an Eastern European origin and then was fairly recognized in Israel as a halachic authority who sided with the idea of Yom Ha'atzmaut was Rabbi Meshulam Roth, source number 12. Indeed, there's no doubt that the 5th of Iyar, which was established by the government, the members of the parliament, who are the elected representatives of the people, and the majority of the great rabbis, to celebrate through the land, to commemorate our salvation, our freedom. It's a mitzvah to make it a day of happiness in Yom Tov and to recite Hallel. And so that was one approach, the thrust, on one side of this was taken in terms of celebrating. Rabbi Shlomo Yosef Zevin, who was Eastern European rabbi who emigrated from Europe to Israel in the pre-state time, really more of he had both a Lithuanian yeshiva orientation as well as a Chabad philosophy. He was the editor-in-chief of the Encyclopedia Talmudit project, which is a major project that was very influential in the yeshiva world, someone who would probably be recognized and well-known within the Haredi circles. He was moved by 1948, and when describing this in 1959 article, he wrote, "The existence of an independent state of Israel is a wondrous miracle, is considered the most important event in all Jewish history in recent generations. This independent Jewish sovereignty is undeniably a marvelous thing to behold. We are commanded to give thanks and praise to God. Whoever does not do so is one who denies the Lord's beneficence. Accordingly, we are obliged to recite the Hallel and have a festive meal. We should make Yom Ha'atzmaut a day of thanksgiving to the Lord, a day of festive rejoicing that bears the mark of our tradition. In my opinion, we ought to emphasize that Israel's independence is divinely miraculous. There's no place for the illusion that our own might and strength brought about this state." Right? So the idea that so certainly someone who lived through it and was acknowledged by all as someone who was a Torah scholar and rabbinic leader, felt that it was impossible not to celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut. And this is not someone coming from who was not a part of the chief rabbinate circle, although he respected them. It was not part of the religious Zionist camp, per se. But how could you not celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut? It's something divine. It's something wondrous. They say about Rabbi Zevin that he himself did not say Hallel with a bracha, but he would go to a shul that did, so that he could answer Amen, so that he could participate on that level. At the same time, you have the flip side. Rabbi Yitzchak Yaakov Weiss, who felt that this was difficult, this was painful. The response in source 14 is coming in after 1967, where Yom Yerushalayim reignited the conversation, because now we have another day that's being set now. Yom Yerushalayim as a celebration is coming after Lag BaOmer, so it doesn't have the same Omer components, but does have the Hallel issue, and Hallel with a bracha issue. The Chief Rabbinate introduced Hallel with a bracha for Yom Ha'atzmaut. Yom Yerushalayim, feeling that it was much more of a miraculous day. The reason the Rabbinate refrained from a bracha on Hallel in Yom Ha'atzmaut was it was a great day, but that day itself, they didn't have the same level of miracle. Yom Yerushalayim, 6-day war, seemed much more miraculous. But Rabbi Yitzchak Yaakov Weiss, someone more aligned with the Haredi worldview as well as the anti-Zionist worldview, he says, Lidavonenu, right? It's painful that there are those midalasam, those who are kind of, from the lower ranks of our people, that when they say Hallel with the bracha because of their rabbis. They're going against Sfira. So he says he's going to write an article explaining why you shouldn't do this. And he's thankful that as he says in the fourth line, Shehosilonu Rabbeinu HaKadosh Misatmar Asher Kro Neman Yishmias Yivrei Hashem L'Loches V'Sifrogash Al Gulav Al Tumash Kasser Rabbeinu Kadosh B'Zmanu Hulayone B'Dvar HaKadosh Machotzim L'Avosesh. He says he talks straight to the heart of the matter and pulls no punches against all of this. Right? The Satmar Rebbe was anti-Zionist. The Satmar Rebbe presented the opposite view of Rabbi Zevin. Rabbi Zevin says this is divine, and the Satmar Rebbe says this was Maseh Satan. This is satanic to have a state of Israel. So you have those who are pushing back very strongly. Whatever is happening in terms of celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut is going completely against. And he quotes some of the other Haredi rabbis of the time. Rabbi Kanievsky was asked about some of these issues, and he says, "Zehu isur chamur v'norah shel bracha levatala akiras yisodos b'dinei torasenu hakdosha rachmana litzlan." The last line, where this is horrific. To behold that people would go in this direction. You see, this is, kind of the rabbinic reaction in the aftermath, of 1948 in terms of the chief rabbinate, Rabbi Zevin, chief rabbinate being kind of the Zionist official line, Rabbi Zevin being an observer who's very much positively predisposed towards Yom Ha'atzmaut. And then you have Rabbi Weiss and the Satmar Rebbe on the other side of that spectrum. In the immediate aftermath. As this continues further down the road, more contemporary times, just, from Rabbi Avigdor Miller, who was a well-known rabbi and educator in Brooklyn. This was on one of the handouts that from his Shabbos booklet that was recently, I think it was given out this past Shabbos, but was dated May 1980 for the discussion. Would a person be allowed to celebrate the 5th of Iyar the same way he celebrates the 4th of July? The answer is that the 4th of July has no Jewish connotation. It's a neutral thing. And since it's a demonstration of loyalty to the country where you live, it certainly is virtuous to hang out a flag on the 4th of July. I think all Jews should be interested in demonstrating solidarity with the American people, especially if, thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's such a country that fosters ideals of liberty which Jews enjoy today. July 4th, neutral positive. The 5th of Iyar is different. The Medinas Yisrael was founded by atheists. Of course, there were a small handful of Ma'aminim also, but the vast majority were atheists, or they were extreme left-wing radicals. So how can we demonstrate any kind of sympathy with a state that is diametrically opposed to the Torah? The mere fact that they draft girls into the army, which is not true, but girls can opt out, it's such a horrendous contradiction to Jewish traditions, Jewish attitudes, that for that alone, every conscientious Jew should feel tremendous hostility to the state of Israel. So, kind of the animosity or the antipathy of the Satmar Rebbe continues to carry over into some of the more ultra-Orthodox voices of the late 20th century. Here we're going, 30 and 40 years beyond. Now we're 78 years beyond. The zealous opposition continues based on the fact that Israel was established by those who were against tradition or extreme left-wing radicals. So that again, it doesn't. It's more of a political broadside than a halachic response. But if we're asking the question who's celebrating, who's not celebrating, Rabbi Miller is certainly not celebrating. Moving forward into more contemporary voice and reaction to this type of sentiment, Rabbi Yoshua Pfeffer, who is a Haredi rabbi in Israel, he edits a blog called Tzarich Iyun. Tzarich Iyun means requires investigation. He's a very interesting personality. He recently, in the last several months, I guess in the last 6 months or so, he enlisted to serve as a chaplain in the IDF. It's on the forefront of the conversation about Haredi affiliation with the state of Israel in terms of the draft, in terms of just in general. He wrote about the forgotten virtue of gratitude and the Haredi encounter with the state. This is an article from last Yom Ha'atzmaut. In a public shir delivered in Panovich, a ultra-Orthodox yeshiva, in 2012, Rabbi Gershon Edelstein, who was the head, called upon his listeners to recognize their debt of gratitude to IDF soldiers. Quote, even secular Jews who are not Torah observant, he said, if they give their lives to save others out of love for their fellow man, they have a share in the world to come like the martyrs of Lod in the Talmud, who gave their lives for their community. And yet, teachers in Beis Yaakov schools are too afraid to say these words aloud, even though they are self-evident as they are true. In matters concerning our relationship with the state, fear and confusion have obscured our moral clarity. Lacking firm guidance, we bequeath that same confusion to the next generation. So the idea that on a certain baseline level, Rabbi Pfeffer is arguing that the sentiments that are at least neutral towards the state as an entity, but positive towards the reality, are there. They're just generally not articulated loudly, and instead, voices like Rabbi Miller's continue to be the ones that get disseminated. And it's something that Rabbi Pfeffer is dealing with in Israel. And, what seems to be that, there are steps that, the voices that we are seeing. Look, even where we began, the very fact there's a Hashmonai brigade, and the very fact that there are certain the efforts like Rabbi Pfeffer's and others indicate that it's not the universal position of the Haredi community to take that type of zealotry and those anti-attitudes, but we have to have patience. Just in terms of how, what we're recognizing, Rabbi Pfeffer talks about being grateful for what we have, just some other values that the state of Israel has introduced in a positive direction for the progress of the Jewish people. Some other voices out there. Rabbi Amital talks about we should just look at the fact that the Jewish people have their sovereignty. What better authority could we seek than the Rambam, who views the fact that the Jews achieve some level of independence in their own country as one of the reasons for the holiday of Hanukkah. Right? We talked before about Purim. How did Hanukkah become a holiday? So the Rambam says, they talk about the victory of the Maccabees and the fact that there was sovereignty restored. A lot of the emphasis on the establishment of Hanukkah as a holiday references the miracle which we celebrate, but the foundation of the holiday is on the restoration of sovereignty. If those 200 years of Jewish sovereignty give added significance to the miracle of Hanukkah, then the ingathering of the exiles, which is taking place before our eyes, is surely of no less significance. Certainly a state of Israel which has facilitated a kibbutz galiot and having sovereignty. We're not yet at 200 years, but it definitely has changed the state, the status of the Jews. And just to contrast that, Herzl is an interesting snippet from his diaries. And there was a quote from this in the recent HaMizrahi magazine, but this is a bit of a fuller version of January 26, 1904, Herzl visited Pope Pius. I think it was Pope Pius X, and not the Pope Pius of the World War II infamy. But he said, and this comes from his diaries, which are translated online, yesterday I was with the Pope. He received me standing and held out his hand, which I did not kiss. Lepay was one of his advisors that told me I had to do it, but I didn't. I believe I incurred his displeasure by this, for everyone who visits him kneels down and at least kisses his hand. This hand kiss had caused me a lot of worry. I was quite glad it was finally out of the way. So you have kind of this interaction between Herzl and the Pope, and he doesn't kiss his hand. I briefly placed my request before him. Herzl is looking for the Pope's support for the Zionist endeavor. He, however, possibly annoyed by my refusal to kiss his hand, answered certainly resolutely, we cannot give approval to this movement. We cannot prevent the Jews from going to Jerusalem, but we could never sanction it. The soil of Jerusalem, if it was not always sacred, has been sanctified by the life of Jesus. As the head of the church, I cannot tell you anything different. The Jews have not recognized our Lord, therefore we cannot recognize the Jewish people. I've always been on good terms with the Jews. Only the other evening, 2 Jews were here to see me. After all, there are other bonds in those of religion, courtesy and philanthropy. These we do not deny to Jews. Indeed, we also pray for them, that their minds be enlightened. And so, if you come to Palestine and settle your people there, we will have churches and priests ready to baptize all of you. So that is the position that the Jewish nation found itself in with the church then. And you know, in many ways, this is something that Rav Soloveitchik returns to in his Kol Dodi Dofek. That sentiment, as expressed by the Pope to Herzl, was completely overturned by the establishment of the State of Israel and the political resurgence of the Jewish people, kind of the extension of what Rav Amital saw in being worthy of celebration with the State of Israel. Herzl experienced the other side of that, being on the other end of that, the relationship between Jews and Christians or Jews and Catholics remains fraught and not smooth, and maybe some are still ready to baptize all of us. At the same time, there being a state of Israel which is involved in all that it's involved in the world stage, it has been a pushback against the theological visioning of the Jews that the Catholic Church has always had of us being rejected. The shoe is now on the other foot, and a kind of a reaction to that, an acknowledgement of that. Even in 1948, Rav Soloveitchik, commenting on the establishment of the State of Israel, in spiritual terms, similar to the idea of Rav Amital, but from a spiritual perspective, not only political perspective. With regard to the redemption of the Shekhinah from defilement, I'm definitely optimistic. Whoever ultimately stands at the helm, life in Israel will be, to a certain extent, be completely Jewish. I read in the press that the kitchens of the Israeli army are strictly kosher. When that fateful Friday of the establishment of the State of Israel was proclaimed, the ceremony was held 8 hours early so as not to desecrate the Sabbath, despite various logistical difficulties. The act alone signified the Sabbath. More than 50 rallies dedicated towards Sabbath observance, which were the popular reaction to promote Shabbos in America in the 20s and 30s, were rallies. Naturally, religious Jewry must stand watch and fight for it, but I can assure everyone that Shabbat in Eretz Yisrael will be holier than it was in the Jewish neighborhood in Berlin, in the Frankfurt Ghetto, or even on Bedford Avenue in Brooklyn. I also believe that in Israel, Santa Claus will not have his white beard, the radio will not play Silent Night, Holy Night. As a Jew who follows Chazal, and this I can assure all zealots in the exile, the fact that there's spiritual progress. It's not only political progress, it's spiritual progress. You notice the article is called Jewish Sovereignty and the Redemption of the Shekhinah, the Divine Presence. So, in terms of who celebrates Yom HaAtzmaut, I think an honest appraisal of what we have accomplished since 1948, there's reason to celebrate. How you celebrate, what you say, what you do, there can be a differentiation. I think definitely have to eat a blue and white cookie. That goes without saying. But those who seem against the concept or the gratitude inherent in where we are as a Jewish nation because of 1948, I don't think it fits in with the necessarily the traditional religious response. There could be other reasons for opposing it, but it seems that a genuine religious reaction certainly requires at least some gratitude, if not some celebration, or at least some joy. Even if there's not going to be engagement with ritual celebration. I just want to point out, one of my favorite stories that Rabbi Yosef Blau tells that he wrote about in an article from Mizrahi was that he talked about in source 20, Bnei Akiva had a festive prayer service and a chagiga, and I was asked why I hadn't shaved. Right, so maybe the idea of shaving for Yom HaAtzmaut is sometimes viewed as do you celebrate it or not? They say Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, the son of the original Rav Avram Kook, was the Rosh Hashiva of Merkaz Harav, and he would say that walking into the Beis Medrash on Yom Ha'atzmaut, he was able to tell who were the Ma'aminim and who were not Ma'aminim. Who were the believers? The believers shaved for Yom Ha'atzmaut because they believed in God's influence on the world, and those who were unbelievers did not shave on Yom Ha'atzmaut. So Rabbi Blau was being asked, how come you didn't shave? So he was uncomfortable with deciding on my own. I called Rav Moshe Feinstein, the leading halachic authority from the event. I didn't ask Rav Soloveitchik because he permitted shaving during Sfira. Rav Soloveitchik, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are different approaches as to shaving during the Omer. And Rav Soloveitchik felt that one is permitted to shave during the entire period of the Omer if one normally shaves. So Rabbi Blau didn't want to ask him if he could shave or not, because the Rav would say, of course he could shave, because that was his position. But Rav Blau at the time wasn't following Rav Soloveitchik's position to shave, so he wanted to know whether he should shave or not. So he called Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Rabbi Feinstein answered the phone himself. I wasn't even one of his students, hello. He asked me if I considered it a holiday. When I replied yes, he said I should shave. I'm not aware of any written version of this response. So the idea that emerges here is, A, you have Rabbi Moshe Feinstein at least being positively disposed towards the idea of Yom Ha'atzmaut being a holiday. But also, what was the determining factor of whether it's a holiday or not? He asked me if I considered it a holiday. And this, I think, goes back to what we were saying throughout in terms of recognizing that, as we started with, the idea of Purim emerging as the beginning of the Jewish people bottom up, responding, taking control of their destiny, Aschalta de Geula, as being able to be the motivation for the national Jewish holiday of Purim, or the individual, communal, or familial individual Purims that were celebrated afterwards. If we feel it's a holiday, then it is a holiday. And I think that we definitely should feel that it's a holiday and engage in that giving of thanks, in that joy, in that celebration, certainly as it comes with the cost of what has been commemorated in Yom HaZikaron. So I hope the answer of who celebrates Yom HaAtzmaut is pretty much all of us. And hopefully the joy will only increase and we'll be worthy of the sacrifice of those that got us here. And early Chag Atzmaut Sameach to one and all.
Amen.
Amen.